Good morning, everyone. Still morning. Are you still up for another speech presentation? I'm very happy to be invited here. I am a philosopher of music, or from origin, you could say, philosopher of culture, of art. And I'm very happy that the organizers thought somehow it needs to be here. The arts needs to be part of this day. So I will try to, well, tell you a few ideas I had about how to combine these two, the arts or the aesthetic experience on the one hand, and care ethics for caregivers, but of course for the whole practice of care. So my initial thought was that at a time when the workload for healthcare providers keeps increasing, and I assume that is very often the case, and healthcare institutions are becoming more and more impersonal, many caregivers experience stress. I think that's a given. That's where your project started. And despite the ethically meaningful work they do, as we have heard in the former presentation, and which should in principle provide intrinsic satisfaction to the caregiver, many experience that the pressure is too great. However, the many cases of burnout may not only be due to an excessive workload, but also to the constant moral pressure, the moral distress to which these caregivers are exposed. And I think that is really the starting point of your ETHCOM project, right? A caregiver has to face many challenges, amongst which confronting the pain and the demands of the patients. So the question is how to push through, how to remain strong and yet empathic. And also, how should we conceive of moral well-being? What does that mean? What does it mean to be well in a moral sense, especially in the context of care? So let me start by reading a short quote from a very small book that I wrote together with a colleague of mine from the University of Antwerp, Pascal Giele, which was called Fragility, the book. So I will just read it out loud. It's very much in theme with the time of the year. It's about to fall. A chestnut rolls past me in the garden. I follow it with my eyes. It stops, staying put, looking like a small carapace, determined to prevent anyone from entering. I take a step forward and I stretch out my hand, but I hesitate. And I want to reach the fruit. If I want to reach the fruit, it will prick me. Leave it be. I will not harm it. Yet I know that sometime its protective casing will crack. The husk lying there is just an advance guard. If the chestnut is to become a tree, it will have to permit itself to be touched. If it is to live, it will have to open up sooner or later. But the husk hesitates. So I wait as well. And gradually I realize that its strength does not lie in its spikes, but in its fragility. It's all a matter of timing. If it bursts open in time, it can take root. If it remains closed, it will die inside. Before my eyes, the chestnut hesitates to touch or be touched. So as you might have guessed, this story is a metaphor for the multiple moral dimensions of care. And central to care practices is a fragile balance between the gentle touch of the caregiver, not the spiky touch, let's hope, both physical and spiritual, and on the other hand, the vulnerable experience of being touched, both by the patient but also by the caregiver. But as we all know, being touched can be painful. And the underlying idea of this metaphor is the following. What if moral suffering is a sign of moral health and not of a lack thereof? What if the core of our moral well-being lies in our fragility, our ability to open up and to be touched, and not in shielding ourselves like a chestnut? In that case, if that is the case, I am convinced that the arts have a role to play in this. as a prime setting of touching and being touched, a prime setting of experience. And I think the idea of experience is also very central to your project, learning through experience. So I therefore would like to explore a number of perspectives that art offers on the ideal of well-being, especially moral well-being, in order to find an answer to that question. What does that mean, moral well-being? And I will present them through the lens of artworks, and then discuss what I think is a matching theoretical paradigm with regard to art and well-being. And in doing so, I will single out 4 different aspects that can contribute to moral resilience and that can be enhanced, according to me, in the aesthetic experience. And I was very surprised to see that the 4 aspects that I will come up with perfectly match the former presentation by my colleague. So that's very nice. So let's try to look at them from an aesthetic perspective now. And let me start. Well, I would like this lecture to also be an experience for you, an aesthetic experience, so that we can also try to, feel what I'm trying to convince you of. The first perspective here comes from the romantic view of art, typical 19th century view of art. And this is perfectly exemplified by this famous painting by Caspar David Friedrich, which you probably know, Der Wanderer über den Nebelmeer. It's painted in 1818. And I think, well, to my mind, as I'm a philosopher of music, that well, many musics can go along with this, but this is a perfect example. Let's listen a bit. Who did recognize this? Are there piano players here? Yes. Who was the composer? Just a guess. No. It's one of the big B's. It was Ludwig van Beethoven and his Sonata Pathétique, the Adagio from it. And I think with a bit of imagination that you could hear the nebel, the mist, somehow being there in a tranquil place. And what we see and hear is a romantic belief in the importance of sensitivity. From literature to painting, from music to theater, works of art can literally and figuratively teach us how to be touched. That's the main romantic idea and the ideal of the arts. To see and hear and feel in an aesthetic way opens us up to something greater. And that's what you see here. Somehow this walking man, the wanderer, it's a typical figure in romantic aesthetics and literature, leaves the daily world somehow, finds a place a bit higher and has reached a point where there is a kind of overview and a sort of calmness. This allows us to be touched by nature, but also by the spiritual dimension of life, and to transcend our material, egoistic self. That's the romantic belief. And this is also because the Romantics regarded art as a successor of religion. This is a time, 1818, when religion is gradually being relinquished. It's a time of secularization, and painting, literature, music come in its place. And within this so-called Kunstreligion, the religion of art, the idea was that moral and political emancipation can be achieved only by transcending yourself, by liberating oneself from both the material and the intellectual straitjackets in which we are all too often trapped, the daily world. And this is the ideal of elevation that frees oneself from worldly daily chores. I have to see. Yes. I'm sorry. Okay. One has to free oneself from worldly daily chores in order to arrive at a more noble or high-minded attitude that embraces spirituality. By focusing on that which transcends us, we can escape the egocentric perspective. Now, how do how does that translate to context of care? Let us first look at the theoretical paradigm that underlies these romantic ideals. And this figure here on the left is Friedrich von Schiller, who was a big fan of Ludwig van Beethoven, and who has become known for his letters on the aesthetic education of man, which he wrote in response to the French Revolution, that at that time, the beginning of the 19th century, had really become a disaster. Somehow the French Revolution was a failure, at least according to the contemporaries then, because it had somehow ended into a state of terror, complete terror, a regime of terror. And the question of Friedrich Schiller was, how is it possible that those elevated high ideals of fraternity, of liberty, of equality, such nice ideals that in principle everybody loves, how is it possible that this turns society into a terror, state of terror? And to go very short, I don't want to make it into a caricature, but I think it's true to say that one of the main answers that he formulated was society and men were not prepared, men and women, of course, civilians, were not prepared for these ideals because they still needed an aesthetic education. Now I can say a lot about this, but this is not a course in aesthetics. So let's just stick to this one very famous quote from his letters, in which he says, aesthetic matters are fundamental for the harmonious development of both society and the individual. And he means that by having aesthetic experiences, one can free oneself by having an experience of beauty from, on the one hand, the necessary needs of the body. You need to have food, you need to have sleep, you need to have drinks, whatever. So that is a kind of necessity that you cannot really escape all the time, but at times you can somehow liberate yourself from it, the material needs. And on the other hand, the way too rational intellectual ideals that were those of the French Revolution, equality, fraternity, liberty. He said that was really too intellectual. What we need is to have ideas really touch the heart. And that can only happen by training yourself through an aesthetic education. So this is the core idea that I want to take with us today in the rest of my presentation, because I still believe that there is a lot to say for this idea that the arts and the aesthetic experience can teach us something. But, a major but, I've searched the internet using the searching term hospital art, and this is what came out. And I especially liked the picture because you still see the sort of very uncozy lighting and, you know, the heating in front. It's obviously a corridor. It's a painting on the wall in the Erasmus Hospital in Rotterdam. And it raises the question, how can we apply all these romantic ideas and romantic ideals on the situation today? For sure, Schiller's ideas have been taken into many different directions, and one of them is a more or less literal application of his theory, namely to democratically spread art throughout public spaces such as hospitals, but also, like, you know, metro stations, schools, universities, public parks, and you name it. And the question is, of course, what is the real impact of such artworks? Do they really enhance the harmonious development of individual and society? That was the high ideal of Schiller. One can ask, and it's really an open question, has this work contributed to the moral resilience of the patients and the caregivers in the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam? It might have, it might not have, we cannot say. But I think one of the problems seems to be that this kind of art can easily go unnoticed. In the middle of the daily routine, professional caregivers, especially under the pressure of increasing workload, are probably not in the right state to have a real aesthetic experience. One needs to have the time, but also the intention and the means to sit down and to contemplate the work, to be like the wanderer in Friedrich's painting. And as a matter of fact, and now that we're in a museum, I should have chosen a picture of Dietrich Bouts, but this can work as well. Does anyone know this painting? The Adoration of the Lamb by Jan van Eyck. It's one of the famous altar pieces that you can go and admire in Ghent. And I included this painting because I'm convinced that even outside of these public spaces, these hospitals, metro stations, whatever, even outside the public sphere of public art, many people experience difficulty in relating to art. So this famous work is difficult for one reason, because the iconology, the Christian iconology, is not very known to all of us. We are not really familiar with all the different meanings of all the symbols that are used in it. But even just the religious experience itself is really something from the past. And the way that we present artworks in museums or in churches or wherever is very often from a distance. That is part of this aesthetic experience. But this also creates a gap. And many people, I think, find it perhaps interesting to look at it, but are you really touched? Is this really the kind of experience that Schiller was talking about? And this has been a problem for a while. There is always this feeling of crisis that there is a problem for the arts and young people are not interested anymore. And many museums do many big efforts, this Museum M as well. And one of the efforts they do to open up these works is to create these more interactive expositions. Many of them are called immersive experience. And here you see pictures. That's why I needed the former picture to be Van Eyck, because this is an expo called Lights on Van Eyck, which was shown in the, I think, 2020 during COVID in the end in the St. Nicholas Church. I don't know if any of you were there. No, okay, but I think you can imagine what I'm trying to talk about. So what happened is that the iconology, but like really the language of the images of Van Eyck are used to make big projections on all the walls of this church, on the ceilings. They are moving a little bit. There is nice music there. And on the left, that's the most spectacular. You see there were 4 moving robotic arms with screens on which different pictures and paintings were projected, so that, well, that's the idea, that the viewer, the public, is completely immersed in the painterly world by Van Eyck. Somehow the gap is being closed between the artwork and the viewer. And interestingly, on the website of this exposition, which is still online, there's an interesting quote by my colleague Jan Dumoulin, who is a Van Eyck expert from the University of Ghent, who said the following: Lights on Van Eyck, which is the name of the exposition, lets you discover Van Eyck's impressive oeuvre in an accessible way. So the accessibility is important. He is known for his techniques to reproduce color and light very clearly. A marvelous discovery for people in the 15th century who had never seen such a representation of the world. In the 15th century, there was the discovery of oil paint, which made it much more easy to paint these incredibly impressive colors. So they were new to the 15th century medieval people. And Jan Dumoulin continues saying, the technology used by Lights on Van Eyck accentuates these bright lights and pure colors even more. The audience will be just as amazed by Van Eyck's work as the medieval people were centuries ago. So the idea is that somehow, in order to have this aesthetic experience again of being completely overwhelmed, which must have been the experience of the medieval person standing there in a church, almost never encountering images in their lives, and suddenly, because of course the adoration of the lamp was most time of the year it was closed, and then suddenly the panels were opened, for instance at Easter, and they were completely overwhelmed. And the idea here is that today, in a world by pictures every day, from morning till evening on our telephones and wherever. We need something more. We need to spice it up. We need something extra. So we get all these immersive experiences. And it's not just a commercial thing. All the big museums are also going for it. Museum IM has their interactive immersive experiences. The Royal Museum of Art in Antwerp has one. They all have it as a means to somehow open up, right? Open up the artwork and therefore allow the public to relate. So that's a way to bridge the gap. Let us now develop this thought a little bit further. I have a picture here of a very special concert that I wish I would have been there, but my youngest daughter was just born, so that was impossible. In 2018, in the Antwerp Cathedral, there was a concert of a piece called Sleep by a composer called Max Richter. And I hear many of you probably know him. And if you don't know his name, you probably know his music because, well, it's everywhere. It's in lots of Netflix shows and movies and, well, probably on the radio as well, concert stages. Let us just hear to a small part of his music. Does any one of you recognize this? Have you ever fallen to sleep on this music? Because the title is Sleep. It was a small part of this huge, gigantic composition. It's 8 hours long. And as you are all in the health business, I presume you know that 8 hours is supposed to be the perfect amount of sleep that we should get every night. Or I don't know if anyone ever gets it. The whole composition was thought out and worked out in collaboration with a neuroscientist. So to make sure that all the different parts of the composition really follow the different parts of your sleep, the different phases. How does it follow these phases? By imitating the frequency of the brain waves. They are different in all different parts of the sleep. So the idea is, as you can see, that the public enters the concert hall. Here it was by night, mostly it is being staged like that. They enter, they go find a place to lay down, they go to sleep, the piece starts, and 8 hours later they wake up after a fantastic night, and the concert is finished. That's the idea. It's music to listen to while sleeping. Of course, this raises a lot of questions. One funny detail I want to share with you is that I talked to the pastor of the cathedral, and he said, well, to some degree, the concert was a failure because many people, as you can see, refused to go to sleep. They were there, they would even walk towards the concert stage because there is this live concert. You see Max Richter sitting there at the piano and a string quintet, and they actually wanted to listen. But the whole idea of the composition is that it is very repetitive, very minimalistic, and it's not giving you a lot of information to process. You can easily drift in, drift out and go back in, and you don't need to worry about having missed a lot. I could, let you listen to just a few seconds and you get the idea. It's different if you listen to Beethoven. You actually have the feeling that he's using sentences to convey something. But here the idea is to comfort you, to give you a nice husk. This ideal corresponds, and this shouldn't have been there already, the title immersion, because now you can't see the title. But I think this is very much of this time. The idea that being immersed is good for you, is a form of self-care. And to go even further, to rest and to sleep is a form of resistance. You see here Trisha Hersey, who is very famous, popular writer right now, has written this manifesto with the title Rest is Resistance, in which she actually states that nowadays, in what she calls grind culture, grind is to, like what you do with pepper, you grind it. People are being used as workforces, As you can see, she's also from Black descendant, and her forefathers or foreparents had been part of slavery in the United States. And she says that's really the perfect example of what grind culture is about. They use all the forces of your body and then you are being thrown away. And what she claims is that still today, large companies are using their workforce in the same way, even if they pay them. The idea is that you use your workers, you use what they have, and then, you know, they can leave. So the only thing that you can do, says Hershey, is leave, take a nap, rest, sleep. So the whole manifesto is about sleeping, really taking time to sleep, very literally. Which I think is very telling about our time. There's many developments in our culture nowadays that go that direction. Young generations who are not or who are not willing to, for instance, work after 5 o'clock, or to reply to emails during the weekend, or to, you know, do whatever would be a surplus on what they actually have engaged for in their contract, which is quite difficult sometimes for organizations. But you see, there is this form of resistance. And I think this really sums up the second ideal that I wanted to share with you. So the first was elevation, and the second is immersion, which is actually the contradictory movement. But they are both important, because somehow you can only be immersed once you have elevated from the daily routine, practical routine of having to do this and having to do that. And the idea of immersion is that you are not alienated, that you feel comfortable, that you feel somehow at ease, that somehow your life is structured in a way that you are at home in your own life. And this implies, of course, ideas and ideals like nearness, restful, resistant attitude. Okay, that's the second one. Let's go to the next. This is an interesting book, because one can ask whether such a sleepy and restful attitude does not take away the attention to the other when you're lying there in your sleeping bag, very cozy, and even perhaps the attention to yourself when you're sleeping, or to the artwork, to the composition. Does the immersive experience allow for a sharpness of mind, for the attentiveness that is needed in all sorts of care? Is it not too much cutting off of all ties with the world and with oneself? I think that's a fair question, and a very important one that we have to ask ourselves today, in a time where immersion is such a hype. And I think this critique is very well exemplified in this interesting book by Otessa Moshfegh called My Year of Rest and Relaxation, published in 2018. And I can tell you a lot about the book. It's very funny. It's lots of dark humor, but it's also very deep, I think. The main plot is that the protagonist, a young, successful, beautiful, rich New York woman who has a diploma in art history, has been hurt by life, by her parents, by whatever boyfriend, love, the world. And her idea is to put herself to sleep for a full year, to find rest and to escape from that pain and from the world itself. So the whole book is about her quest for the right sleeping pills, the anti-anxiety pills, antipsychotic medications, because she really wants to be completely offline. That's the idea. And she finds funny ways to do so. In the end, she arrives at being asleep, and she does lots of things in her sleep. Okay. What this book seems to convey is the idea that developing an emotional husk is the best solution to prevent moral distress and burnout. Just go to sleep. Take a step back. And this is also how many of the comments on the book and the reviews interpreted the plot. Here is one from the New Yorker. There is something in this liberatory solipsism that feels akin to what is commonly peddled today as wellness. There is a whole business of wellness in our days, where the idea is that you take yourself out of the world. That's the same idea of this sleep experience. Another one, they called it an examination of self-care. Somehow this is the ultimate ideal of taking care of yourself, saying, I can just go to sleep for a whole year. But there was also this comment from Rebecca Stoner, who wrote, underneath, I don't know if you can all read it, it's a bit too low, I'm sorry. She wrote, underneath the surface of my year, the book hums of faith in the power of art to rouse us. To rouse is actually to awake you. To make us believe that though the world may feel intolerable, it remains worthwhile to dive into the unknown wide awake. So this is funny because it's a book about going to sleep. But of course, what this book really wants to show us is not that we need to anesthetize ourselves to the pain caused by the world, but that we need to be wide awake. It's, in fact, it's a caricature, it's a satire. We need not to lose ourselves. We must dare to calmly face that which causes the unrest within ourselves. That is obviously the deeper meaning of the book. And somehow the writer, by writing this book, by writing literature, believes that she can attain that insight in her readers. Yet, I think it also makes fun because of this major hype, and you don't need to go and read all these things because I just use it as an illustration of the kind of schemes that you are all very familiar with, because we see it implemented everywhere. Many organizations, and I assume healthcare institutions as well, encourage their employees to strengthen and to shield their inner self. For example, by allowing them to exercise during the working hours or to do sports, taking yoga classes or doing mindfulness classes. And the central idea is that a healthy mind in a healthy body is better able to withstand moral stress. The implication, however, is that caregivers should not only take care of others, they should also take care of themselves. That becomes part of your job. And self-care in this light is a matter of bolstering. Remember my fragment at the beginning about the bolster. To protect ourselves against external stressors by listening carefully to the signals from our own body. That is the idea. To guard our personal borders against transgressive behavior, for instance, by being very alert, by being very assertive, by being very fit, also physically, by making ourselves resilient. And I think this paradigm of thinking about what it means to be morally healthy or strong or resilient is very nicely illustrated by this picture, but I will show you a video fragment later. This is a picture of a famous choreography made by Anna-Theresa de Keersmaker, a Belgian choreographer, who has her company Rosas. And this work is called Phase, on the music of Steve Reich. It was already composed and thought out in 1982, so she was really ahead of her time, I think. Why do I think about this? Because for one thing, Rosas has become very known in the ballet world because of their choreographies that really defy the idea that ballet should be all about somehow, how would I say that, going against the laws of nature. So classical, traditional ballet is about not having gravity, being able to jump, being able to fly, not having weight. In effect, it's a very counter-natural art, traditional ballet. And what Rosas is doing, as like you can see here on the shoes, they have flat shoes, they are not points. They will not stand on their points. They will not do these very counter-natural moves, but they start from very organic small cells, really copying processes in nature. And they do this by really taking care of themselves, their bodies, trying to be very healthy. Many of them are macrobioticians. They really have this spirit of dance as part of a healthy practice of taking care of yourself, and by in that way being able to concentrate on something that is much more natural. Let us look at a small oh, sorry, I should have I can't see what is coming on this screen, so I'm a bit surprised myself. So here it is already, my third key term, attention. So we had elevation, immersion, now we have attention, which was also part of the former presentation. The idea is that somehow, to escape this ideal of immersion, being completely immersed in yourself, shielded off from the world, this is the completely different direction, where you actually are very concentrated by being fit, by being very spiritually clear and healthy. You are able to have attention for the world, for yourself, for patients. Let us look what this looks like. This is part of this phase, just a small fragment, the clapping music. Okay, I think you have an idea now of the kind of choreography that I'm talking about. This is very, very difficult what you're doing. So it's not that they leave behind the ideal that art should somehow be something ambitious. It's very ambitious. And also somehow it really connects back to the romantic ideal that some art should really be outgoing, should create something, should allow you to focus onto something. This is really different from the immersion paradigm, where you are in a sort of very flu state of mind. Yet, let me move to the fourth paradigm, a very different paradigm that is also exemplified in many artworks, and which rejects the idea that mental health should be an individual responsibility. The pressure to avoid moral stress and burnout should not be shifted exclusively to the individual healthcare provider. This paradigm would say. Moral well-being ought not to be a privilege only for the fittest in the professional rat race, those who can run marathons or do hour-long yoga sessions. Therefore, this paradigm says institutions should always strive for an approach that acknowledges and solves the structural problems at the policy level, and not just hand them down to the individual caregivers, saying you have to be careful, you have to watch out, you have to work on your mental health, you have to work on your physical health. I think if I saw the presentation of the manifesto that you wrote with ETHCOM, that really comes very close to the idea that a good, healthcare institution should at least provide for time, should provide for the, or afford the forming of qualitative relationships. And of course, that is a structural matter. That is not something that you can resolve as an individual. And I think this paradigm, this critical paradigm, somehow I think it also applies to what I just showed, the choreographies by Anna Teresa de Keersmaker. I will not say too much about it, but lately she was in the Belgian newspapers because her dancers actually complained it was too ambitious. She was asking too much. They all felt compelled to be macrobioticians. They all felt compelled to constantly watch their weight, to constantly be fit. And she was actually regarded as someone who was actually transgressive, having transgressive behavior towards her dancers. And I think somehow this really says something about the kind of system that paradigm still works in. And this philosopher called Mark Fisher, a British philosopher, was unfortunately already deceased, and was very involved with questions about mental well-being. He actually committed suicide because of his difficulties to somehow live his life. Also experimented a lot with medication and drugs and everything. But he wrote very interesting and very accurate critiques of our contemporary society. And this essay called Capitalist Realism has become really a cult essay, at least for philosophers. And there is, just to take out one quote that really goes along with his critique. He wrote, "The pandemic of mental anguish." He's convinced that we are actually living a pandemic of mental anguish in our contemporary modern Western times. So this pandemic that afflicts our time cannot be properly understood or healed if viewed as a private problem suffered by damaged individuals, or not even damaged individuals, I would add, just suffered by everyone who is trying to comply with a system that actually does not give you enough time, does not give you the right accommodation to fulfill your human moral needs. Fisher sees two main problems with the common interpretation of self-care as an individual responsibility. Well, for one, it is too individual. It is a problem on a structural level, but also that all these solutions that say you should work on your health, you should work on your all these things, actually play into the hands of what he calls the capitalist system. It's a sort of feedback loop. The more you try to survive in the system, the more the system will be enhanced, will be, become stronger. It is exactly what Hershey called the grind culture, that you enhance by stressing time and again how important it is that you are resilient. You should be resilient. You should be resilient. And again, of course, I think this really ties back in with the story I told you about the husk, about the chestnut. If you say that the only way to survive is to stay within your shell, you will die. That's not the way to start giving life. And interestingly, there's another picture of concerts of Max Richter's work, Sleep. It was in Great Britain, and here the people are very nice and they sleep. They don't sit up, but perhaps this was hours into the night, I don't know. But interestingly, Max Richter, who of course has also received lots of criticism, sorry, here we are again. I'm going to put this up. Don't want you to fall asleep. He said in an interview, "It's protest music against this sort of very super industrialized, intense, mechanized way of living right now. It's a political work in that sense. It's a call to arms to stop what we're doing." That's interesting. So it's not all just about, retreating, about building a small husk. He calls it a political work. It is a protest against the kind of grind culture or capitalist system, what Fisher said, according to Richter, at least. That means, as a political statement, this work involves at least the experience of togetherness. It's not individual, he says, because we're all together there. Normally you're sleeping alone, but here you're sleeping together. There is a sense of togetherness here. And the other point of critique that Fisher has formulated, that it, plays into the grind culture, into the capitalist system, he says, no, just like Hershey says, this is saying no to the system, because sleeping is not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed not, well, at least if we sleep, it's to remain fit, but not just for pleasure. However, philosophers like the word however, there's always a twist and a turn. I find this a fantastic image. It's a still from a movie made by a Belgian polyphonic vocal ensemble called Grain de la Voix. And what you see here are 4 singers who are somehow, I don't know if they are really lost, but they are, walking around in the basement, in the cellars of the St. Nicholas Church, where this exposition Lights on Van Eyck was, that we first saw. And you see they have these VR glasses on, and it was COVID, so they also have the masks on, which makes the picture even better. And somehow they are all in their own world. And I think somehow in this picture you can already see the kind of critique or the kind of doubt that I have with the Max Richter take our perspective on the problem, if only because this immense popularity of his music and of all these immersive expos that you see nowadays, they're very easily being appropriated by the culture industry. That means that many people are earning a lot of money. It's a business model. For instance, for Max Richter, he alone made sure that the record company Deutsche Grammophon, which is a very prestigious old record company, which was almost bankrupt, and then they signed, or he signed a contract with Deutsche Grammophon, and now they're, well, back in business and more than that. It's incredible how much money is involved. Also, the ticketing selling systems worldwide, they really somehow profit from these types of, well, immersion hype. How could such a model really be a protest against the system, I would ask? And do the people lying there sleeping in their small concert beds really experience the music as a kind of protest? I wonder, just like I wonder with hospital art. To my opinion, what actually is happening, or what part of what is happening, I don't really want to condemn these practices because they're also very nice. But what you see is that we all get lost in our own world, again, in a very individual manner. That we are all being immersed, put to sleep, but that this also makes us utterly lonely, or even lost. What you see here is for people being very alienated from the real world, and they use art to somehow surround themselves with self-chosen surroundings. But that is not what really a moral attitude implies. So let me go to the last slide of this, or no, the one but last slide of my presentation, just to contrast the former image with these images. You can take your time to look at them. I selected them obviously because I think they really exemplify a completely different idea of what art could be, or the aesthetic experience could be. If Fisher was after anything, Mark Fisher, it would surely have to do with the idea that art can connect. Even if the aesthetic experience is intrinsically personal, it's something that I experience as a person. The arts surely have the power to connect people. In and by themselves, the arts imply what we call a sensus communis, a common sense, the idea that what happens takes part in a community. And it's not just a solipsistic experience like we saw in the former picture. And that is in fact why Friedrich Schiller, placed all his hopes in the arts as an antidote to this barbarism of the French Revolution, because art is always part of a community experience. It can create an atmosphere or a mentality that nurtures the desire for connection. Connection between the spectators and the work of art, that is already a connection. So I would say that in a painting of Caspar David Friedrich, even if you see a lonely figure, this figure is completely connecting to the world. He is part of the world. The idea is not that he is somehow retreating. He's not blindfolded. And I think, oh yes, I chose a picture here from the website of the Museum M, so you can now go out and look where this picture was taken. So, well, the cliche picture would be just one person looking at one painting, and that would already be enough in sense of connecting. There is also already a kind of relationship, a kind of communication taking place there, a kind of curiosity going out from the viewer, and a kind of generosity going out from the artist who is actually displaying something. But as you can see, it's even much more nice if you do that together and if you can talk about it, if you share the experience, if you somehow try to formulate what it does to you, and this somehow connects you. If you find that someone else is touched by an artwork that also touches you, that is one of the deepest, nicest forms of connection that you can have. Listening together to music, laughing together, and I don't know what kind of show this picture is taken of. The orchestra, it's a very traditional model, but it's think it still works as a really nice example of how connection through art can take place, where everyone has to play their own role and they all add to the total result. And on the right hand above, I think you see a nice picture how the arts also can be an inclusive story, how there are always ways to find how people can connect with. I think we saw with the coloring pencils in the former presentation, how this can be done in practice in a very, you don't need to be a Picasso or a Van Gogh to take up a pencil and try to somehow participate. So, where was I? Yes, likewise, the individual caregiver can explore a path that does not strive for self-protection, growing a husk, but starts from a desire for connection, to create a principally open attitude driven by curiosity for the other, ready and eager to be touched. This is an outgoing movement. Okay, here is the last one. Sorry, I have no control. So this was my last fourth perspective that I want to add to my reflections. The idea of connection is very central to an aesthetic attitude towards moral care. And this brings me to one of my favorite pictures, and I just inserted it because I'm a huge fan of, well, both figures who are here. You see Alma and Gustav Mahler. Mahler, who is the most famous, I think, as a composer of late romantic music, but Alma was a composer herself. She was a muse for many artists in her time. And I added the last fragment of music. I will just let you hear a short snippet because I think lunch is waiting for you, and then I will go to my concluding words. I'm sorry, it's barbarous to cut off the music, but this is one of my favorite songs written by Mahler. It's called Ich bin der Welt abhanden gekommen. It's a poem by the poet Friedrich Rückert. Mahler wrote 4 Rückert lieder on poems by him. And to go short, the idea of the poem is that the poet or the person singing or whomever is writing to his or her lover saying, I am lost to the world. Somehow I am completely happy to be here in myself. I'm thinking of you. You may think that I have died. The poem says, I'm not. I'm still connected. I'm very happy to be here in my place and in my song where I'm creating. And somehow I am in peace with the world. It's a fantastically beautiful song. If you can, you should look it up and listen to it. There's many nice versions. And I think it goes very nice together with this picture, this image of the composer and his wife retreating during the summer months to their summer cabin, summer house in the mountains, taking walks every day, discussing whatever they're discussing. We don't know what they're talking about, but I like to imagine that they are discussing their work, they're discussing music, they're discussing perhaps the nice views, the panoramic views of the Alps, I think they are. And I think all the different aspects that I've been trying to explore together with you today come together here. So the first one, to just recapitulate, the elevation aspects. First of all, there is literally the idea they are in the mountains. They are a bit, searching a higher place to go out of, the hecticity of everyday life. That's the idea of being der Welt abhanden gekommen. But also the idea that Caspar David Friedrich depicted in his famous painting, the idea that sometimes you need to elevate yourself above the daily discussions. Just see that it is not really that important, the daily matters. They need to be done, but they're not the end of the world. Someone is trying to protest, I think. The second idea was immersion. And I think what you see here, or what I hope to see here, is 2 people being completely immersed in a conversation. They're walking, they're doing what they're doing, but they're also immersed in the landscape. They're immersed in each other. They were lovers, they were partners. You see the nearness that immersion implies that I've been trying to show here, why it is important to feel at home, to feel at ease. The nearness of spirit, the nearness of heart, the nearness of having the time to talk to each other. The third one was attention. Remember, I spoke about Rosas and about the idea of mindfulness, yoga. And I think it's also here, just paying attention to each other while talking, not just chatting, not just talking because you want to have the words, but really having a conversation is something different. It's because you want to know what the other one thinks, because you want to hear, and then you want to add because you think it's important to be part of that conversation. It's a really outward-looking posture, as against to this immersion ideal. The idea of attention is that you are actually going out there. You are curious to see or to hear or to feel what the other one is experiencing. And then the last one, obviously, connection. I think the two together here, but also in the world, seem to be utterly connected. At least that's how I see this picture, and how I think it is a perfect artistic exemplification or embodiment of an attitude that I would see as a moral attitude, a kind of moral well-being. If you find moments in your professional life, in your personal life, where you can somehow experience or somehow puzzle these four perspectives together. Sometimes it will be more this, sometimes it will be more that, but they're all important, I think, to a moral practice. And we take from Fisher that your institution or wherever you work should afford you to find this place, to find this attitude. That is what I wanted to share with you today. I want to thank you for your attention. I think lunch is waiting for you all. So have a nice day.